The Chahoua Gecko, otherwise known as the mossy prehensile-tailed gecko, is a camouflage master and has got to be the second coolest New Caledonian gecko you can own in captivity. Well, you know, because there's Leachianus, and as everyone knows, Big Potato Gecko outdoes cool camouflage. I mean, that's just Geckos 101. While there's no doubt that these are absolutely an incredible animal to own in captivity, there definitely are some things you need to know about the Chahoua Gecko care before you embark on your new pet. We are going to be going over all of those things in this Chahoua Gecko care guide, starting with number 1, the enclosure size, number 2, heating and lighting, number 3, humidity, number 4, the diet of the Chahoua Gecko, and then lastly, how to set up your Chahoua Gecko's enclosure. And as always, I'm Dakota, that's a chameleon, and you guys are watching Chahoua Gecko Care Guide 2022. And kicking things off, the first thing you are going to need to know to care for your Chahoua Gecko is going to be, number 1, the enclosure size. As you guys can already tell, Chahoua Geckos get a pretty decent size, somewhere around that 10-inch range, going from the tip of the snout to the tip of the tail. That's a pretty good sized gecko, and it's with that I always recommend the minimum enclosure size be somewhere around that 20 to 29 gallon aquarium style if you're going that way, or the alternative being the exoterras with actual dimensions, not just gallon sizes, because those are dumb. But those sizes are going to be somewhere around the 18 by 18 by 24 as a bare minimum. Now remember, this is the minimum enclosure size for the animal. With this animal being 10 inches, I always recommend bigger is always better, which is why a custom-made PVC enclosure or an aftermarket enclosure would be a better bet for you. Hey, maybe that aftermarket enclosure just happens to be a Zen habitat, like the enclosure that is right behind me. Wow, look at how great this enclosure looks. Just so happens that they make a 2 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot model. Wow, that's incredible. Maybe you just head down to the description and check one out if you want to learn more information. Feel like that was a good segue into the sponsorship, but I just feel like I didn't hook it well enough. Moving on, let's get into the next topic of Chahoua care, and that is going to bring us to number 2, the heating and lighting requirements for your Chahoua. Unlike their cousin, the crested gecko, these guys actually prefer their temperatures to be a little warmer, so let's get into the heating with that. Now, when it comes to the heating for your Chahoua gecko, you're going to want to provide some sort of basking temperature. That basking temp getting somewhere between the 80s to 85 at the most. Then, of course, continuing a temperature gradient down to the cool end of that being around the 70 to 74 area. Of course, you're going to be wanting that ambient air temperature to be somewhere around the high 70s area. Now remember guys, there is a key difference between basking and ambient temps. Basking temperatures are going to be where your basking zone is, whether that be if you're utilizing heat tape on a thermostat, a basking bulb, whatever it is. That one area is going to be at that higher temp, that being the 80 to 85 degree up there. Now the air temperatures are going to be the temperatures around inside the enclosure, not just in that one designated area. So air temperature, 70s, high 70s. Basking temperature, 80 to 85. There are a couple different ways to measure this. Of course, measuring the basking area, you're going to want an infrared thermometer to measure that area, so it's going to measure the basking surface of where you want that heat bulb to be. And then the ambient temperatures, you're going to want some sort of digital probe. I always opt for using a digital one versus the analog, you know, the ones with the little things that go like this. Those are massively inaccurate. Save yourself the headache. Just buy yourself one of the $12, you know, digital thermometers, and you're going to have a much better time reading your temps. Of course, guys, we cannot forget about temperature gradient. Now, we said a little bit earlier, you're going to want the high 70s, 80 to 85 in that basking, but you also are going to want to have a cool end. You're going to want to be able to let your gecko decide where it wants to go. If it just ate a big meal and wants to digest, it's going to go to that higher temperature. If it wants it a little bit lower, it's going to go down to that lower part. Now, when we're talking about arboreal geckos, which means you're going to have a pretty tall enclosure, the general gist of the matter is your temperature gradient is going to go from up to down instead of side to side, like with terrestrial animals, let's say a bearded dragon. It's with that being said, you're going to want that gradient to be a little bit lower down there on the bottom of the floor, again that 72 to 74 degrees, and then as it goes up and up into the basking light or whatever heating element you're using, that's when those temperatures are going to slowly increase to, again, those ones that we talked about a little bit earlier. To use to heat up your enclosure is going to depend on a lot of different variables. Of course, over here at DBCB Exotics, we have a lot of geckos. Like, we have a lot of geckos. And it's with that, I utilize air temperature to heat the entire room itself because we have a similar species that we're going to require similar temps. With that being said, I actually utilize a UVB bulb to be that basking temperature because my air temperatures are already higher. However, depending on what region you're using, where you're at, what temperatures your room are, it's going to differ a lot and you're probably going to be better off with a basking bulb. So there's a couple different ways to heat an enclosure. Number one, like I said, basking. You can either get those at the reptile shop. You guys know, they got the little gecko on there. You're going to spend like 15 bucks. Burn out in like 2 weeks. Or you can do the little reptile hack that I love to do and go to your local Home Depot or Lowe's and purchase yourself a nice par 38 floodlight. It's gonna be a lot cheaper, somewhere around that $6 to $7 range, and it's gonna last a lot longer. Doesn't have a gecko on it though, so I guess there's pros and cons with all of it, but honestly, I'd go for the Home Depot one. I did just mention UVB, which is a great segue into our next topic onto this one, and that's going to be the lighting aspect. Now, Chahoua geckos aren't going to just need a basking bulb. You're not just going to heat them up and then you're done. They also require UVB lighting. Now, this UVB light is going to help synthesize that calcium and turn it into D3. What that means exactly, I'm not too sure, but I'm not a science major. I just breed lizards for a living. It's with that being said, and it's my humble recommendation that you do provide UVB for your animals. Now, the best UVB on the market right now is going to be either the ZooMed, Repti, whatever, T5 UVB, the high output one, or the Arcadia ones going from their different percentage lines. You're going to want a little bit of a lower percentage just because this is more of a jungle dwelling species. We're not talking Uromastic or iguana that's going to be out basking in those sun rays, but it is an animal that does get some of that UVB, and you definitely want to replicate that into captivity, which is why I always recommend the UVB. As you guys know, not that expensive. You're spending what, $400, $500, $600, $900 on a Chahoua gecko? You can't shell out 60 bucks for a UVB bulb. I mean, come on. Twice a year, let's just do it. Moving on, there's still some things we need to know before we're ready to care for our Chahoua gecko. That's gonna bring us to number 3, the humidity requirements you need for your Chahoua. Although the Chahoua gecko differs between the crested gecko and a couple of things, the humidity is going to stay the same. Now, the humidity requirements for your Chahoua gecko are going to be somewhere around that 60 to 80% of ambient humidity. I know what you must be asking yourself right now, and that's going to be, Dakota, how can it be 60 and 80% at the same time? How are you just throwing two numbers with a curve on us? Let's tell us what the humidity level needs to be. And well, here's the thing, it needs to be both. Comes for caring for reptiles in captivity, one of the important aspects to humidity is allowing a dip and a curve. Now, humidity for these animals should never be linear. Your humidity level should never be like this all the time. It's not that good. What you're gonna need is a dip. You're gonna want to, when missing, that temperature is gonna spike up, and then that level is gonna go down, 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 missed again, back up, and that's exactly what we're talking about here. 80% up, down, 70, 68, 65, 60, back up into 80, and then you just continue that over and over and over again for the rest of your lives. Well, I guess the rest of the Chahua's life. I find a lot with new keepers in the hobby, they struggle with understanding humidity and trying to get it up. There seems to be a lot of conflict in trying to get the humidity up into that 80%, which is why I actually dedicated an entire video going into how to raise your humidity. I'll leave a little card right there for you guys. To summarize it real quick, the big things you're going to want to be using is a deep substrate layer, watering that substrate, making sure that substrate stays nice and moist, misting the enclosure, covering parts of the enclosure, especially if you're using aquariums. Aquariums are just top screen, all that humidity is just going straight out, while covering part of that thing is actually going to dedicate and retain some of that humidity in instead of it just escaping. All right, we're getting the Chahoua gecko care down pretty good. I think we got it pretty down. However, we still don't know how to feed our gecko and actually what to feed him, how often to feed him, all of that good stuff. So I guess that's going to bring us to our next topic, and that is going to be number 4, the diet requirements for your Chahoua gecko. Now, when it comes to these big mossy boys, I like to define them as a hybrid feeder. What that means is they're going to get two different things. They're not strictly an insectivore where they're only going to be feeding on insects, but they're also not strictly with the crested gecko diet, the little pre-made stuff they swirl around and serve it up, and it's like the easiest thing in the world. They're actually going to need somewhere in the middle of feeding on both. Honestly, I think the diet's pretty simple, and I think it's pretty general, you know? It's not like they have some sort of specialized diet, right? You can feed them a multitude of different insects, always provide a variety. You guys already know what it is. Crested gecko... Wait, no, don't feed crested crickets, dubia roaches, red runners, lobsters, some worms. We got the mealworms, superworms, black soldier fly larvae, silkworms, whack. There is a multitude of different things you can feed for these guys, and always make sure you're feeding a variety, understanding the nutrition of those bugs. Of course, you don't want to feed too many waxworms. That's going to lead to negative side effects such as fatty liver disease. However, some fat is always good, especially if your female just laid a fresh clutch of eggs, getting that fat storage back up. Some BSFLs in there also to help that phosphorus and calcium levels bring back up. It's all a little bit of a variety game. You can't really just feed one staple of anything. Mix it up a little bit. You'll enjoy it, and your animal will enjoy it, I'm sure. As I say, there is no staple. There is a staple. Wow, Dakota, good one on that one. That staple is going to be the crested gecko diet. Now, of course, there are a multitude of different brands and flavors. Obviously, Pangea or Rapashi being the two big boys. Flavor's gonna be dependent. I always find, you know, try a couple different flavors out, maybe get one of their trial sizes, and then see which one your gecko prefers, and just start getting that flavor, because that means it's going to eat more of it, and that's pretty much it. I always make sure that my animal always has a supply of that crested gecko diet, and then I'm putting crickets or whatever bug I'm using at that point pretty much twice a week for them. Best advice I can give for you guys is watch your animal, you know? Just because I say it needs to be fed 2 weeks, that doesn't mean it always needs to be fed every Monday and Thursday. If your gecko's getting a little bit pudgy, don't continue to eat it at that point. Do a little bit more of the leaner insects and a little bit less often until it gets to that ideal weight. Here we are, the last thing on this list. We went through a great journey here today, boys and girls, in this 5 or 6 minutes we've been here. We talked about the enclosure size, heating and lighting, humidity requirements, and the diet you need to feed your Chahoua. But it leaves us with one more thing. We've got all that information and knowledge under our belt. However, there's one thing we're missing, and that is going to be how to set up your Chahoua gecko's enclosure. Of course, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, these guys do hail from New Caledonia, just like the crested geckos. And where are they at in New Caledonia? Well, I don't know the specific locality, but what I do know is they are in trees, lots of trees, and they're up there hiding with a little moss and barky cool coloration, man. It's so rad that they can just like camouflage on bark, and that's what they're doing. We should replicate that within captivity. Now, how exactly are we going to replicate that source and make it as natural as possible? Well, that's going to be make sure that you have that tall enclosure, which, as we already talked about, the 18 by 18 by 24 is a bare minimum. Bigger's always better, you know. Maybe that 2x2 Zen habitats, I'm just saying. Now that we have that tall enclosure, we want to make sure that we are filling it properly, making sure the animal has every square inch to be able to utilize from that. Now, a couple different ways are going to be laying out branches. You can get these branches at your local pet stores, you know, the grapevine, the, I don't know, the branches at the pet store, cork tubes and cork flats, things like that. Or you can actually go out to your local conservation area and get some branches for yourself. Make sure you're checking your local laws to make sure it is legal, but after a quick wash, baking it in the sun for a little bit, make sure there's no ants, termites, even those nasty stuff in there, you're able to put that right into the enclosure, and that's gonna be pretty rad for the animal. Of course, always make sure you are providing both vertically and horizontal areas for your animal, making sure that it can climb this way and also this way. I like to put a relatively large area wherever the UVB bar is gonna go, because I know the animal's gonna wanna bask in that area, so we actually provide a nice cork bark flat. That way the animal can really stretch out, just chill out, and bask in those UVB rays. Was it that hard, Dakota? Was that hard to say that? The one thing I do want to stress with this species is make sure you are utilizing those horizontal perches. Don't just make everything go out like this and then you got a bunch of branches that are like this. Make sure you got some boys just like that. Just like that. Because if you're not utilizing enough horizontal spaces for your Chahoua gecko, it's gonna end up climbing on the glass and laying on it. And here's the thing with Chahuas. Like most gecko species, they're not too bright. Let's start talking about tokays. But it's with that being said that Chahoua gecko will stand this way, not this way. And when it stands this way on the glass, its tail is gonna end up losing muscle mass from the strain of holding its tail up the entire time. And that's eventually gonna flop over, otherwise known as floppy tail syndrome or FTS. It's not good. It's not a good thing. It can quickly be resolved if you have an animal with horizontal perches that it can go and lay on, that it would prefer to lay on than the uncomfortability of holding its tail up 24/7 on the glass. But however, like I said, they're not that smart. If you're just having one, they're probably not going to use it. I can't tell you why, but make sure you got multiple in there so the animal can decide where it wants to go. And don't get FTS. It's not a curable thing. They'll always have this weird like limp on the tail, and it's just not good. Put some branches in there, take your time with the enclosure, and make sure it is a special place for your animal to live in. And there you have it, guys. How to care for your Chahoua Gecko in 2022. It's just like all the other care guides, but I made it in 2022, so that automatically makes it better than the 2021 care guides. You're actually in your research phase before you're actually purchasing your Chahoua Gecko. Maybe you want to get one from me over here. We are producing some amazing Chahoua Geckos over here. We have a couple that are just about to be hitting on the market. If you guys are interested in that, make sure to head over down to the description below. We got our little Morph Market page. You guys will see it when they first pop up, or potentially join the Patreon crew. Now, when the Patreon crew is in there, I actually post all of my animals and available babies for sale before they go on the public. So if you're seeing, you know, maybe you want a Tokay or Chahoua Gecko, but you're not seeing I ever post them publicly, it's because the Patreon peeps are taking it all up. So that's a thing to take into consideration, I guess, or not, you know, it is what it is. But hey, the information's there for you. Do whatever you want with it. As always, my boys and girls, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to follow us over here at DBCB Exotics. I will see you later. I'm gonna go feed a chameleon. Until next time, goodbye.